Welcome to the Pastor's Podcast. This is Pastor Scott, and with me today are Pastor Brian.
Hello.
Here just observing as Pastor Matt.
I'll say some things.
Some things?
Yeah.
Shocker.
Some funny things. I'll say some funny things. They're coming later.
Did you call me observer?
Yeah, observer Matt.
Observer Matt.
Yeah. That's all right.
And, and Meredith Storrs. Meredith Storrs is with us.
I'll say the first thing. Just so everyone knows, when I was in college, Meredith was my boss.
This is actually true.
This is actually true. And she was a mean boss. She was harsh and critical. It was unbelievable.
I like being in charge, so.
I'm kidding. She was a great boss.
Will you turn Meredith
Thank
up? Keep talking.
Yeah.
Okay, here I am. It's great to be here. It's nice to see you all in 3D. You have real human faces. And
We
that's
do.
Nice.
It's kind of nice.
Yeah.
It's kind of nice. All right. It's good to see you too.
Thank you.
We're talking about the fact that this all, safer at home, all sorts of crazy restrictions, everything's still going on, and it's summer. And it is, halfway through the summer. But, baseball's got a term, they call it the dog days of summer, right? Like it's kind of the middle of the season when it's just like a slog, right? You're playing 162 games and you're just trying to get through numbers like 80 to 100, and doesn't feel like the end's anywhere near, and we're just trying to get through. And I think in a lot of ways, a lot of people, that's what a lot of people feel like right now, right? It's just kind of like the dog days of summer, trying to get through. And we just wanted to talk a little bit about how we can navigate this part of this season, even in some ways as we shift from something that I think we were hoping maybe was shorter term to recognizing the long-term reality of the situation we're in and how we do that personally. So what does it look like to move? Well, I'm gonna edit
Are
that
you
out.
verbal processing?
I am.
Let's just jump in.
Dang it.
Let's just jump into Scott thinking through some things here.
All right. So what is, maybe let's start with
Maybe we should ask Meredith what she wants to talk about.
That's a good question.
Have you ever thought about that?
Okay, I want to hear what is the difference between that first several months for you guys, and then we're here in the summer, we're thinking about the fall. Like, how does the fall feel different to the spring that was chaos? And I don't know, may still be chaos.
What do you think,
now
observer?
Now she's hosting.
Yeah.
This is awesome.
What do you think, Brian?
I'm observing. I'm going to say nothing else from here on out.
So I think it depends on who you are, how you're going to answer that, right? Because there's different situations. I think for me personally, as a parent of a lot of small kids, school becomes a pretty big factor. Like looking towards the fall, because like that has a majority share. It's like my experience as a parent with my kids during the season has the bulk of kind of the time spent, the energy spent, and the thoughts spent on it. So I think for a lot of people, that's a piece of it. I also just think for a lot of people, for a lot of reasons, there's no end date, and that's kind of traumatizing. Like it's just really, I've talked to people, I know it's true for me. Like, we know this isn't going to last forever, but it was a few weeks is one thing, then it was a few months. Now it's like there's not an end in sight. And so if you're in a situation where you feel like it's really heavy and the constraints are just really difficult to bear, for whatever reason, it's really hard to know, okay, this is going to go on for the rest of the year. Or maybe indefinitely.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like that to me is the real difference between the first part and this part is we've done this now for a while and everyone's ready to be done, but it's not even close. And so.
All right. So I'm actually I'm going to jump to the last question on my list because I think this is helpful, like on a personal side, and then we'll get to how we view others. Like, how do we navigate that stress? Like, how do we navigate the stress that comes from looking forward to an unknown and very potentially not radically different fall?
Yeah, this has been I think probably my biggest challenge in thinking about what comes next, because the initial shock is over. Mm-hmm. We know that there is an unknown. Mm-hmm. And so, there was a season kind of at the beginning where I feel like in some ways I was like, on my best behavior. I was being my best Christian self because I was like, oh my gosh, this is chaos. And so the pressure of that gave me that kind of almost an adrenaline motivation.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about
And
it.
now it's like when you learn to drive and you're first like behind the wheel and you're clutching the steering wheel. Now I feel like I'm on my phone being like, whatever, it's but I don't want to be, I don't want to be treating this next season of my life as if it's sort of whatever. But this has really been unseating for me, and I think perhaps a lot of people listening can resonate with this. The idol that we have of choice, and that I keep hearing this refrain in my head. This is not the life I chose. Like I wouldn't have set up my life this way. And for many of us, we have navigated a life where we got to pick what I wanted to study or what I wanted to pursue for some type of job or whether I wanted to have a family. And this is really unseating that as I continue to think about the fall. And the big question that I continue going back to in prayer is, God, this is the life you chose for me. And if I know that you are a good God, and I do know that, and I can trust that, then even when this feels hard, I mean, I'm one of those people that like, one of the hardest things for me is feeling that I have zero sense of agency. Like for whatever reason, like that will make my skin crawl in a way that I don't know that everybody experiences, but I think some people do. And so being able to sit back and just trust in God's providence has been important. And I am thankful that I'm learning that and engaging with that area of growth in my spiritual life. But man, is it hard.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's so helpful to even both recognize that and then look back to God in the midst of it. 'Cause I feel like that's a shift that's going on in my heart right now. I think up to this point, I feel like a lot of the things that this took away, I just thought of them as delayed. Like it just pushed back, like even just things that Laura and I wanted to do together, she had her 40th birthday in the midst of this, like, and we're like, oh, okay. Like, we'll just do that a little later. What?
Do you give her permission to say that?
Dude, she does not care. Wait, what's this text? What's going on here?
Just wondering. Just wondering if you should.
No, absolutely. She actually she loves birthdays. She loves celebrating birthdays. She loves getting older. She loves being 40. But we celebrate. But I think in a lot of ways it was like, oh, okay, like these celebrations we planned, things with the kids that we'd planned, things even about like. Even in my own like investment in people and relationships, I feel like, okay, like this is just postponing this a little bit. And I feel like in a lot of ways, postponement is turning into canceling.
Yeah.
Right. Like opportunities that we thought we'd just have a little bit delayed might actually pass us by, and we don't have those opportunities again. And it is a shift that we have to then take the time to think back to the sovereignty of God in light of that reality. Right. Being honest about as we move forward. So in light of that, I think that this also brings a lot of unique challenges with the people around us, right? Like with our relationships. And I think one of the things, the refrains we keep talking about is that as we engage with God and his word, he then calls us to love one another, right? To care for one another, to consider others more significant than ourselves. And I think this maybe the new version of this season, even as we look at the summer into the fall, begs new questions about how we can consider others, those around us, more significant than ourselves. And so maybe let's just start with those like in your home. If you happen to be living with somebody, if you're either living with family, if you have a roommate, there's like people that you're closest to, spending your days with. What are some things we should keep in consideration as we seek to love and care for those that are able to be around us every day in the midst of all this?
I mean, I think one of the chief things is that they're your neighbor too, which I think is one of the harder. I think you've said that, Scott, before, where you like love your neighbor as yourself is typically, for some reason, it comes to mind when you're thinking about people who you don't live with. But the people you do live with, whether it's people who are younger than you, like young kids, or older than you, like parents or roommates or what, like something about the proximity, they just sort of fall outside the realm of loving your neighbor as yourself. They're just kind of there. And so one of the chief things is just recognizing that they are as much a part of the calling to love your neighbor as yourself as anyone else.
Yeah.
And so just that mental shift because the proximity is only increasing, right? If you're living with someone, you're only closer in a sense than you were before. So at some point there's a temptation to not be thinking of anyone as a neighbor that you need to love as yourself, because you're not seeing your neighbors right now. But the reality is you are. They're living with you if you're living with somebody. So that to me is one of the first things to think through.
Yeah, and that is such a moving target, I'm finding, in our home, where, you know, you get to know the people that you live with and you feel like you have a sense of how to love them well. And because we're in a season where things keep shifting and changing, I think it's worth going back and asking the question, how's the balance here? Are you feeling cared for? You know, and maybe those conversations feel a little cumbersome or awkward, but engaging in them more regularly so that you can make sure you're really caring for each other.
That's so helpful, and I think so insightful. I even think about the fact that not only has the situation changed, but people are changing. I think we are all changing
definitely.
We're changing at a different clip than normal.
Yeah.
Right. Because under normal circumstances, change happens at a certain pace. But when we're out of our routines and the situation is changing, it causes us to change. I mean, one of the things that actually has surprised me the most about the last 4 months is how much some of my kids have changed. Like different personality dynamics, different interests than they had 4 months ago. And not all of them equally, but if I'm still trying to love them and care for them the same way I did 4 months ago, the same way I did 2 months ago, chances are there's a lot of insight, a lot of dynamics at work that I'm not taking into consideration. And so I think even more so than the normal, this is exactly that. We need to take the time to ask ourselves, okay, how is God calling me to consider others more significant than myself, especially those in my home?
And especially when they're really young and they don't have that self-awareness to articulate what they're going through, like being able to try to take yourself out of those stressful moments where they're disobeying or being ridiculous and to recognize that they're also experiencing stress. You know, we were just talking about how we're navigating that long haul of stress, and they are too, and they're still trying to figure out, like, you know, how do I express my sadness? How do I express the fact that I'm tired of my brother? And trying to really like see into their hearts, and as much as we can, as the behavior on the outside just looks like disobedience and can be really frustrating, to really take a moment and ask, like, okay, is there something going on in their heart that I have an opportunity to ask about, to care for?
Same with roommates too. I mean, I think in some ways it's harder with kids, in some ways it's easier. Yeah. Because you, as a parent, to some degree, you kind of look down at your kids and you know they can't articulate things.
Yes.
They're just constantly in your space. And so you're always observing. The question is, how intentional are you being? Are you really trying to kind of shepherd them towards something? With roommates, it can be difficult because they're not always, the cards aren't always on their sleeve, you know? And so like, you can just assume that they're just, I don't know, being weird or difficult or whatever, and not trace it back to what's going on around us and how their response or reaction might have changed. And just that sense of, we should all, Matt said this, you know, a couple months ago, like we just all need to be treating each other with a lot of grace right now. And trying to keep that in mind, whoever you're living with, and what that might look like, depending on the differences in situation.
Yeah, that was a great idea, Matt.
Thank you, Scott.
You're welcome.
It probably came from you.
Okay, so let's take
no one understands that reference. Like,
no one gets totally inside joke.
The inside joke is that
Are we going to explain it?
Yeah, well, I mean, Scott doesn't always give positive affirmations. For the first 15
I've gotten better.
For the first 15 years that I've known him, the best compliment I've ever gotten from him is, that's not a horrible idea. So one time he sent me an email that said, Matt had a great idea, and I actually paid to get it put on a mug, and that's the mug I use at the church. I don't have it with me at the moment, but it's the coffee mug I use at the church. So he's just dropping inside jokes from the last 15 years.
Does it face out or in? Like, do you see the great idea? Or
I
is
see the
everyone
great
else?
idea.
Okay.
I see it. I put it specifically where if I hold it with my right hand, I see it.
So it's an encouragement mug.
It's an encouragement mug. It's an encouragement mug.
We all need one of those.
Yeah.
We all need one of those. All right, so let's take a step outside of the house, right? And thinking about your community group, your Christian friends. I think this is also another area where I think we all kind of went, okay, couple of months, we're not going to be able to see each other as much. Like, we'll just do it. We'll just kind of hunker down and get through this, and then we'll all come back together. But as this shifts into a foreseeable new normal, I think it also causes us to have to think through how can we love and care for our brothers and sisters in Christ? How can we love those in our community group intentionally and proactively, and not just stay kind of hunkered into our own world and waiting it out, which I think sometimes I feel tempted to do. So what does that look like? What are some considerations what are some things we should take into consideration as we think about how to love our brothers and sisters in Christ, those in our community groups?
I feel like this has been said in various ways throughout this season, but in times of trouble, like struggle, trauma, when you ask someone, how can I bear your burdens? A lot of times they just don't know how to answer. And I think one of the things I really want to be more intentional about is when I connect with people, however, hopefully that is happening, that I'm asking more thoughtful questions. I mean, this is really like, I would love if this were more the norm anyway, to just be asking, how's your time in the Word? How are you doing? Okay, but how are you really doing? And as you hear and listen to their responses, things will come up that give you ideas for how you might be able to bear their burdens. And if I sit alone in my room and try to think like, okay, I read this passage and I'm going to try to think of somebody's burden I can bear, like I come up blank. But often when I have a conversation with someone, something that they share will give me an idea. And I think for me, like, you always want people to like just know how to love you and do it.
Yeah.
But that can't happen if we aren't really trying to know each other in this time. And so having those thoughtful, intentional conversations, I think, can be really helpful for that.
And so it starts with even just taking the step to pursue people enough to have those conversations, right? To even connect in the first place. Yeah,
I mean, it's so easy to give up right now.
Definitely.
I think it's just so easy. You feel like you have a lot going on. Zoom is kind of awful. In one sense,
it's straight up awful.
Yeah, I mean, in one sense, it's great, but I think the frequent use and like realizing its limitations now makes it feel awful, even though it's been so helpful.
Yeah.
To just kind of go, we can't have the relationship we want to have or need to have. It's just not going to work in this time. And so why put in the effort if it's going to fall so far short of what we know it should be, what we want it to be? And you just have to fight that tooth and nail, because if you do that with something like this that feels to some degree indefinite, we've moved past like, oh, we'll pick up later, and now there's like things that have actually happened to the relationship in the meantime. You can't just pick up, and you're also, I mean, that's kind of personal in one way, that's looking at what you're experiencing. There's also just the reality that if you want to consider others more significant than yourselves, which just means you want to be a Christian, you have to do these sorts of things. You have to get creative and find ways to make that work. And depending on your capacity, it might look different. If you're absolutely drowning in, I don't know, work or kids or something, then it might look like one creative thing you do a month. I don't know. If you're not, it might look like more. But just that idea of, let me ask better questions. Maybe I'll just drop something off unsolicited at their doorstep. Maybe I'll just whatever. Send a dumb e-card. I don't know. Like just do something that makes you feel like you are connected to that person, even if it falls short of what you want it to be. Because if you don't do that, I do think that there's going to be some I guess damage in a sense, or some negligence. Like maintenance can only be deferred so much. It's really hard to pick that back up afterwards. Like this is going to be over one day, and the question is, are we going to come out of it with relationships that are set up to be vibrant? Because we put in that effort, and like it's going to take work, but it's there, you can see it, Or are we going to feel like we're starting from scratch, like across the board in every area of our life? That sounds awful, especially relationally in a time when you're already isolated. So just kind of trying to reach out, whatever it looks like, taking that extra 5% of effort that you might not feel like you have and saying, but it's worth it. I think that's just a big thing we all need to be doing.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what your experience has been, but there's a different dynamic on a Zoom call, even with like, you know, maybe just the guys or just the girls in your community group. There's 6 different boxes or 8 different boxes. And that dynamic can be stunted and awkward. But one-on-one on FaceTime or, you know, like there's actually a difference there. And so we may need to consider, am I trying to be efficient and get everybody at once? Or do I have capacity to make some real one-on-one connections with people so that I can have a more natural conversation you know, it's just hard when you've got a lot of faces all trying not to interrupt each other's audio.
And depending on your comfort level, also finding ways to do that safely outdoors or whatever with like one person. These are things that we've encouraged people towards depending on their situation and comfort level. That's worth pursuing right now, even though it takes extra effort. It's not as easy as just, well, I'll meet you over here. But I think it's worth it.
Yeah. All right. So what about the people in our lives who don't know Christ? What about our neighbors, maybe family? I think we've talked about previously about how this is also a really unique opportunity to manifest, demonstrate, and share the gospel, share the hope that the true hope that we can have in the midst of when everything else is up in the air. And I think there's one way in which thinking about like the first 2 to 4 months of this as like, oh, what a cool opportunity. Like, let's grab the opportunity and not miss it and let's do it.
Let's bake some sourdough.
That's right. Yeah.
Or whatever it was everyone was doing that was had free time.
And now, but now obviously I think in some ways, and especially as we look to the fall, in some ways that's harder. But it's not any less. Actually, I think it's even more of an opportunity. I think everyone, we're not the only ones experiencing this. Everybody around us is experiencing this, the trauma of this shift to the unknown ending of this. And they need something to cling to. They need hope more than ever before in the midst of this whole process. How does that provide an opportunity, and how can we strive to love the non-Christians around us well, and even really just steward the hope that God's given us, the fact that we actually do have hope for the sake of those around us?
I come back to what Mayor said a moment ago. I think good questions go a long way. And I think right now, I've always been surprised, even before, COVID and everything, at how often people kind of had this, a little, maybe it was me, maybe it was them, maybe it was both of us, this kind of vibe of like, I'm good, I'm okay. And it took like a single probing question, and they open up and talk to you for like an hour about something really deep and troubling to them, that they're not okay, and they want to talk about it, and they want to talk about it even though they know I'm a pastor. Maybe sometimes because, and for every one person that kind of gets turned off by that, there's like 20 that are like, really, like, maybe you can help me. But it takes I need to take that initiative, that one step of asking a question that shows that I care about how they're really doing, to make that a reality. And I think right now it's a similar situation, whether it's, Zoom in your neighborhood, getting creative with that. Matt, you've talked about how like just being out front in wherever you live, like you're socially distanced, you can have your mask or whatever, but you're out there, you're seeing people, and just being able to have those passing conversations, that creativity, and just having a few questions like, how are you really doing? Like, I know I'm having a rough time. Like, you guys all right? Just something as simple as that can open a door to having a real conversation that you might have now that you wouldn't have had before.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still having lots of meetings working remotely. And so it's easy to jump into the meeting and be like, all right, let's get this over with. Let's talk about the thing we're here to actually discuss. But if it is a smaller, like one-on-one or just a couple of people, to be able to start with like, where's everybody at this morning? How are you feeling coming into this moment? And, maybe they want to also jump into work mode too, but it could be an opening to have a more thoughtful conversation.
Yeah. I really appreciate that, because I appreciate the way in which this moment provides opportunities to do that in work settings that may have not existed before.
It's a really good point.
Right? Where it's nowhere near as weird as it used to be to take a minute with colleagues and say, hey, how are you doing? Like, let's talk about life. Like, let me convey that I care about you.
Oh, I know. I've seen everyone's children now. And there are plenty of people that I didn't even know if they had kids, and you're getting to see into their lives. And so in that vulnerability, I think some people are willing to share,
Yeah, absolutely. And, it's interesting. I think both of you kind of hit on the fact that one of the enemies of this is our continued preoccupation with efficiency.
Yeah.
Right? This continued idolatry of efficiency. And I think it's actually, at least in my head, I feel like this idol of efficiency was able to be put off for a little bit. Like, oh, okay, yeah, we're not going to be as efficient as before for a while, but we'll get back to normal. So
and then we'll do it again.
Yeah, and then we'll be able to do it again. And the reality is that I think that this is putting to death in a number of ways some of the efficiency that we lived by and lived on, and actually that. And the last, like, the death howls of this are the Zoom meetings when all you do is talk about business, and then you're like business, off. Okay, like, let me try to get to something else. And we can almost like try to just keep ourselves busy to make up for it. But I think the world is fundamentally different than it was 6 months ago. Yeah. And I think the Lord's calling us to live like that's true. Not try to pretend it's not, especially in a world that does as much as it can to do that. And that means that it does open up all sorts of different opportunities for the ways He's called us to love those around us, inside or
we have this opportunity to ask, what is possible now? Like, what, now that life doesn't look the way that I thought it did or should or was, what new opportunities might God be showing us in the way that life is structured, at least for the foreseeable future? And are there ways that we can, just straight up pray, like, God, show me what you're doing here. Show me how you're providing in a way that I'm not seeing, or a door you're opening that I've been blind to.
That's so good. And I love it, because there's a part of me, I've thought about that, and I've heard other people say, like, oh, this is like a new opportunity. Everything's thrown up in the air. Like, there's new opportunities, which honestly is just super stressful for me.
Oh, it's overwhelming, because I'm like, what do I do with that? How do I organize it into
what's
a structure?
How do I take advantage of the right opportunity? Like, how do I figure it out? How do I find it? And I think you're exactly right. What God's asking us to do isn't to continue to hold on to our idolatry of our control, but is to step into that with eyes open, deeply prayerfully.
Yeah.
Like, just submitted to Him, saying, Lord, help me see. Help me take a step. Like, I don't know the plan. I've had delusions of control previously, but you are the only one who's in control. And step by step by step, I want you to lead me in the next step. I want you to lead me to the next conversation. I want you to lead me to the next person here, which again, I think helps us to not get overwhelmed by all the different people we're supposed to love, all the different people, all the different opportunities we're supposed to.
And everybody's idea on social media of how you should be living this life now. It's just like too much. Please stop. Exactly.
So, all right. With that, I mean, so as we think about that, as we think about how we navigate that, maybe one last question. How do we continue to navigate our own, I want to say spiritual health, but really, like, how do we pursue that? And maybe just to reiterate some of the things we've said, but how do we pursue that in a way that doesn't feel like it is overwhelming and killing us and is just more pressure? I mean, really, how do we pursue that in light of the gospel? Maybe is the question.
So, I've had kind of a recurring illustration in my head over the last couple of months that ties in with kind of earlier, you guys are saying we've kind of moved from a place of inconvenience to a place of loss. Like there was a delay for a while, and now there's things that are being lost. And that's such an interesting and difficult place to be, where what you thought was one thing turns into something else much worse. And I see it in terms of my kids, in like their own, like they just don't see their friends. Like there's just like there's ways that's really hard for them in ways they don't know how to process. I see it in terms of my wife and I, where not having school or breathing room, and we moved and a bunch of other stuff happened. Like just it's been extraordinarily difficult. Like the survive thrive thing that Matt talks about sometimes, our observer.
Is that also a good idea that Matt has brought to the
Oh,
table?
I encourage him all the time.
Okay.
Even in ways I probably shouldn't.
I don't even need a cup for Brian's encouragement.
No, this is really just a complication. Of
I have like a
Brad's
banner that's
relationship.
like 4 miles long that I just keep adding his compliment.
Brian is a good complimenter.
He is a good
He's a
complimenter.
very good affirmer, actually.
Way to go, Brian.
It's very meta.
Right back at you.
Sorry.
So no, I found myself you feel like you're in a position where what the world should be, like Mary said earlier, we're kind of out of control and unseated. The life that we normally can choose for ourselves isn't available, and for a lot of us, the life we chose for ourselves wasn't like exorbitant. It wasn't this like egregious, luxurious thing. At least it didn't feel that way. It felt like just kind of normal, like human relationships, and like like just it felt very normal. And so to lose that puts you in a position where you feel like you don't have. You could say what you need, but you just don't have this thing. That it isn't what you feel like it should be, and it's not like close. It's pretty far.
Yeah.
And so in my head, I've had this illustration where it feels like I need like $100 to be like in the black, and every day I come across maybe a couple of pennies, and there's this thing where you're like, why would I even pick this up? It's so far from what I need that it just feels like, what's the point? It's going to take forever to do this. I'm never going to get what I actually need, or normal is never going to happen. What these are supposed to be is never going to be like that. Another version would be like with sleep, where you're like, you slept like 2 hours one night. You're like, if I just take a nap now, I'm not even going to take a nap because I don't even want to wake up. It's going to be too hard to wake up. Like, I'd rather just stay awake. And like, that's not a good, but that's not how it works. Pick the penny up, take the nap. Like, and with especially with your spiritual and your mental like well-being in this time, you have to pick up the penny. Like you might stumble across $1 one day, and it's like, that's not 100. You're far off, but you have to pick it up. And so when your time with God is out of sorts still because of all the disruption, when your ability to relate to other people is out of sorts because of the disruption, when your relationships and your relationship with yourself and your family and people you live with and whoever, when all these things are out of sorts, you have to pick up the penny. Even though you're tempted to go, what's the point? It's not what it should be. You have to do it. And I think that's in one way what we talked in terms of like getting in front of the hose a while ago, where it's like, God, be renewed in the spirit of your mind, put off and put on. Like, how do you obey a passive command? It's like, well, you put yourself in a position, to have it happen to you, or falling asleep, you can't make yourself sleep, but you can put yourself in a position to where sleep happens to you. And in the same way, picking up the pennies are putting yourself in a position where the beauty of relationships, where your relationship with God, where all these different things can actually genuinely happen to you, even if they're not the shape and the form you would have chosen. They're still real. Yeah. And God in the gospel still wants to minister to you through those ways, even though they might not be in the shape that you want them to be. There's a uniqueness to it that's still real, still good, still valuable. So you got to pick up the penny. Like that's just what's been in my head the whole time. Every day you got to pick up the pennies. You might stumble across a $5 one day. That's awesome. It's still not 100. Yeah. But you got to pick it up and know it's not 100, but it's something. And it's something good and valuable and real.
Yeah, definitely. I think in terms of like the structures of this season, I've been thinking a lot about how to sort of build something new, to not wait, to not be like, well, we're just going to hunker down, but to say, okay, if this is how life is going to be structured, whatever that looks like for you, to figure out some new systems. I think very early in the stay-at-home order, Scott, you mentioned something about, trying something for a week or trying something, and that has been so important for me in this season, and I think will continue to be important. And as somebody who has struggled with anxiety and depression in different seasons in different ways kind of throughout my life, there have been parts of this time where my mind has not been a fun place to be. It's been really dark. And a lot of the natural disruptors of that have been taken away. And so, in other seasons of life, if I'm busy doing work, I can't be spiraling out on some, crazy, weird thought pattern. But some of that is gone. And so trying to sort of restructure, find new ways to manage my thought life, I think that's very real for a lot of people right now, that some of the crutches that we've used in our walk to help us to, things like establishing those patterns where, I don't know if you've ever heard this, but like if you really want to exercise and you sleep in your running clothes, then it's just one less hurdle when you get out of bed. And I think some of us have established those kinds of patterns for our spiritual life where it's like, I'm going to set myself up for success by doing this or that so that it's easier. And then now we're in a season where some of those things aren't possible. And to try to be creative, to talk to somebody about your struggle and brainstorm together ideas for how, are there new ways that you can create space to manage your emotions better, to be in the Word more consistently, even if it's only pennies,
Yeah. I think that's the perfect way to end. I think it's both being proactive in the ways that we can, being newly proactive in each season, and then as the opportunities and as the blessings and as the moments with God come, taking them and taking, in that sense, like what we can get, recognizing that the Lord is working through all of it and guiding us and moving us forward. So, well, thanks so much. Thanks for taking the time to be with us, Mare.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's great to have
Glad
you.
to
Thank you,
here.
Meredith.
Matt, any parting words?
What have you observed?
Send us off in wisdom.
I have observed that you all are very wise, and I've learned a lot. Thank you.
All right. We'll see you on Sunday.